today we'll try and talk about GRYD, which is DaveAI's new proprietary architecture on enabling enterprises adopt generative AI. And through this, we'll also try to demystify usage of or what is the right choice for an enterprise. Is it an SLM? Is it an LLM with RAG? Is it a combination of everything? Also aspects such as fine-tuning an SLM. Is it important? Because these questions are the most asked or most debated questions today in our conversations with CXOs, in large enterprises at least. To start with, what is GRYD? GRYD allows enterprises to adopt generative AI technologies, including agentic or create agents or leverage a set of AI agents developed by DaveAI or otherwise. Models, these could be large or small models, without having to buy in or tie their strategy into one model or one cloud service provider. So a typical enterprise has two or three aspects. They have a large context, which is they have a lot of know-how that today lies in two forms, in forms of documents, in the form of human know-how. So allowing enterprises to leverage this requires a system that would have a repository of all these documents in whatever format that is, and typically an AI model that would leverage these documents to respond to a question. These are very, very useful, especially when you're running use cases such as contact centers, where or in some cases training, customer support, etc., where you have a repository of information and there is a customer who's asked a question, and you can rely on this data source, process that, and respond to the user. Right? However, the more complex use cases, which are domain specific, we work with auto a lot. So automobile is a classic use case where there is a need for not only context but also intuition of the domain, right? How would a certain person ask question regarding a certain domain specific topic? How are generally those questions responded? What could be the inherent needs of that user, which not only requires facts or context that is coming from your internal database, but also requires intuition of a domain expert to respond to that question, which typically is achieved by fine-tuning a small language model. Right? So in complex use cases or in use cases that are domain specific, with GRYD, what we allow enterprises is to look at a tiered model or a hybrid approach, which has a small language model that is fine-tuned with domain data. Enterprises may not start with that approach, but the ideal architecture is what we're talking about. So there is a small language model fine-tuned with data regarding that domain. There is a Retrieval-Augmented Generation system that augments or that the model leverages for context, because information, the facts change and evolve with, think about a new product being introduced. The data regarding that product is introduced into the system, into the system for the model to respond. So the model relies on that. And finally, there are also use cases that are generalist, right? For language, for creating different kinds of responses to a user, where there is also a need to use a larger model. This provides an ideal architecture, which is a small language model, which then would serve as a foundational model for the enterprise, because the enterprise is all about the domain that they are in. There is a large language model layer. It need not only be one model. This can be multimodal in some sense, different kinds of LLMs tasked for different use cases, and a retrieval-augmented generation system backed with a document portal where all your know-how lies. So a combination of these three allows enterprises, or we believe is the right architecture for an enterprise, getting in, especially for enterprises who are looking at it long term and trying to create their own foundational intelligence. This would be the ideal approach. Now, what are these models? Yes, we are working on our own small language model, but we do also work with frameworks that are already available. Smaller models could be models that are, extremely small models that are less than 1 billion parameters. But even today, models that are trained in less than maybe 6 to 7 billion parameters are also treated as small language models, especially because larger models are getting larger and larger, thus allowing enterprises to look at cost-efficient, faster, nimble models that can serve specific use cases but may not have the context or the generalist approach of larger models. So a combination of SLMs, LLMs, and RAG, we believe will form the architecture, and that's what we're trying to do with GRYD. So it's a tiered or layered architecture where all of these components fit in, and the orchestrator within GRYD will choose which model responds to what use case, or even allow the enterprises to choose the right combinations for different use cases. So what are the advantages of this approach vis-a-vis what most enterprise architectures today look like? At least from our discussion, it looks like predominantly an LLM plus RAG sort of an ecosystem that's serving most use cases. We'll talk about agentic in a bit, but agents and the uses of that. But what are the advantages of using a GRYD-based architecture, which of course we at Dave are evangelizing? Is firstly, for certain use cases, there is an ROI that the brand has to establish. So SLMs, when compared to LLMs from a long-term perspective, are cost-effective, are lighter, can also be deployed in various use cases, but predominantly contributes to the ROI form factor when you are able to train a smaller model to serve maybe 75 to 85% of all use cases, all queries, responding to all queries, let's say, in that particular use case. Then I think it's gonna significantly shift the ROI. Of course, it may not be great to start with that approach for a pilot. So hence I said we are today working with enterprises post pilots. Some of them are of course pilots, but in most cases, I think enterprises have piloted, tried proof of concepts, with whoever they are, and now are looking at building long-term use cases that generate long-term value, have a defined business ROI, and in that case, cost becomes a significant aspect of it. So when you look at that 3-year time frame in which most business use cases define ROI, having SLMs as a core component adds to this. While there is some upfront cost in terms of fine-tuning these models, etc., it still sort of defines usage ROI for use cases that are deployed at scale. So for a small enterprise, for a small and medium enterprise, this may not probably make sense unless, for example, we have created a domain-specific SLM for an industry, and then we provide that to a large set of users. But if you're a large enterprise digital officer or AI officer trying to make this decision, then for sure, small language model being part of it contributes to defining that ROI. The second part is the intuition part that we spoke about, which is the domain understanding, which mostly in these enterprises lie with resources, right? You have a consultant, you have a domain expert, and they have, beyond the know-how that is available in the case studies and white papers that these enterprises have published, there is a certain inherent understanding, right? And an auto expert has. Say, for example, if you're an automobile expert in India, you understand the nuances, how dealerships work, how customer preferences shift between different regions. A part of it is captured with data today, with comprehensive data capturing and storage and analysis systems, but still there is that intuition that we spoke about, and we want eventually your models to replicate that, because today it is with human capital. So how do you harness this collective intelligence of your domain experts into a model so that it doesn't sort of drain away with them moving out of your enterprise? So that's the second key aspect, I would say. And the third one, which is of course one of the most important ones, is we spoke about that in the early part, is your reliance on one service provider, right? And mostly we get counter question that in this case, if Dave is the enabler, then are we not moving away from reliance on a cloud service provider to a middleware provider? but that's not the case. How we are looking at a platform is we are today training enterprise users, and also their system integrators to take the system and develop on top of it, right? So eventually we are trying to build a community within the enterprise that will be able to take this platform and build on top of it. So you are not reliant, while we are providing you a framework and a setup for you to onboard onto this journey. What models you introduce, what additional layers you introduce is flexible, right? So you get a framework to build on top of, and that's why the reliance is not on us. And it is a platform license, which means it allows you to own it without, of course, commercial redistribution rights, but own it for your own use case and build data IP on top of these models and frameworks. So you tomorrow, when a new model comes up, which probably is 10x cheaper or 10x more efficient, then you switch or you introduce that model into your use cases or switch from your existing to the new one without the overload of that being a large migration project. So those are the three key reasons why we believe GRYD is the right approach for enterprises, and we are seeing a lot more of large enterprises opting for a GRYD sort of an approach with Dave and of course with others who are probably offering this to pick up and deploy generative AI use cases.